I still remember the exact feeling, the sharp, sudden yank that snapped my head backward, the way my neck jerked so hard I saw white spots dancing in my vision. The laughter that followed, deep and mocking, like I was the punchline to a joke I never agreed to tell. That was the moment everything changed. Not because a customer grabbed my ponytail in the middle of a crowded restaurant. No, that had happened before. More times than I care to count. What changed that night was what came after. What my manager said. What I decided to do about it. And what happened 18 months later when I walked into a courtroom with 23 recordings, 41 text messages, and the kind of quiet rage that makes lawyers smile and defendants sweat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the night when a man's hand wrapped around my hair like he owned it. And my manager told me with a straight face that he was just playing. Just playing. Those two words would cost that restaurant $437,000. They would cost my manager his career, his reputation, and eventually, his marriage. And they would cost that customer something he never thought he'd lose: his freedom. Before I tell you exactly how all of that happened, I need to ask you something. Take a moment right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. What city? What state? What country? I want to know where my people are. And while you're down there, tell me this. Have you ever been touched at work by someone who thought they had the right? Have you ever reported it and been told you were overreacting? Have you ever felt that burning shame of being dismissed by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. And if this story speaks to you, if you know someone who needs to hear this, send them this video. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's the story of every server, every bartender, every worker who's been told to smile through the pain. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Tamara Williams. For 5 years, I worked at a place called Harbor Lights Grill. It was one of those upscale casual restaurants that dot the waterfront in coastal cities. You know the type. Exposed brick walls, nautical decor, overpriced seafood, and a clientele that ranged from families celebrating birthdays to businessmen closing deals over bourbon and bad behavior. I started there when I was 22, fresh out of community college with a degree in hospitality management and dreams of eventually opening my own restaurant. 5 years later, I was still there, still serving, still smiling, still pretending that the things customers said and did to me were just part of the job. Because that's what everyone told me. That's just how it is in this industry. You want the tips, you deal with the touches. You want the money, you swallow the comments. You want to keep your job, you learn to laugh when hands wander where they shouldn't. For 5 years, I had perfected the art of the invisible dodge. The way you step slightly to the left when a customer's hand drifts toward your hip. The way you lean back when someone tries to pull you closer during a hug goodbye. The way you pretend not to hear the whispered suggestions, the comments about your body, the questions about what time you get off, and whether you'd like some company. I knew every trick in the book. And for 5 years, those tricks kept me safe enough, but they didn't keep me sane. Every night I went home with my jaw aching from fake smiles. Every morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach, dreading another shift of navigating the maze of grabby hands and greedy eyes. My boyfriend at the time couldn't understand why I came home some nights and just cried in the shower. He'd never worked a service job. He didn't know what it was like to be treated like a decoration, like a thing, like something that exists solely for other people's amusement. The man who changed everything was named Gerald Patterson. He was 63 years old, a retired insurance executive with a thick wallet and thicker fingers. He'd been coming to Harbor Lights every Friday night for longer than I'd been alive. The staff called him Mr. P, and everyone knew his habits. Booth 7 by the window, Manhattan on the rocks, hold the cherry, New York strip, medium rare, extra butter. And a wandering eye that never seemed to stop wandering. I'd served him dozens of times over the years. He was one of those customers who tipped well enough that managers looked the other way when complaints came in. And complaints did come in. Not just from me, from every female server who'd ever had the misfortune of being assigned to booth 7. But nothing ever happened. Nothing ever changed. Because Gerald Patterson had been coming to Harbor Lights for over 20 years. Because he spent an average of $300 every Friday night. Because his brother-in-law was a local city councilman. Because in the hierarchy of a restaurant, customer dollars always outweighed employee dignity. But that wasn't even the worst part. What I discovered later would change everything I thought I knew about this situation. The night of October 17th started like any other Friday. The dinner rush hit hard around 6:30. By 7, every table was full. The kitchen was backed up. The bar was 3 drinks behind, and I was running between my section and the floor like my life depended on it. When I saw Gerald Patterson's name on the reservation list, my stomach tightened. I'd been dodging his table assignments for weeks, trading with other servers, claiming I needed to leave early. But that night, we were short-staffed. Monica had called in sick. Tyler was handling the bar solo. And my manager, a man named Dennis Crawford, had already warned me twice about being a team player. "You can't keep avoiding booth 7, Tamara," he'd said the week before. "Mr. P specifically requests you sometimes. You should be flattered." Flattered. Like having a 63-year-old man obsess over you was some kind of compliment. Like his attention was a gift I should be grateful for. So when Gerald Patterson walked through the door at 7:15, I was the one who greeted him. I was the one who led him to booth 7. I was the one who smiled through my teeth as he looked me up and down like I was an item on the menu. "You're looking lovely tonight, Tamara," he said, settling into the booth. "That ponytail suits you. Makes you look younger." I felt my skin crawl, but I kept the smile plastered on my face. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Can I start you off with your usual?" He nodded, but his eyes weren't on my face. They never were. I turned to walk away, and that's when I felt it. Not a brush, not an accident. A grab. A full, deliberate grab of my ponytail. He pulled me backward, hard enough that I stumbled. Hard enough that my neck snapped back and I gasped out loud. "Whoa there," he laughed. "Don't run off so fast. Sit with me a minute." I yanked my head forward, my scalp stinging where he'd pulled. Around us, the restaurant hummed with conversation, silverware clinking, glasses being filled. A few people at nearby tables glanced over, then looked away. I turned around, heart pounding, face burning. "Please don't do that," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. He just smiled. That smile I'd seen 100 times, the smile of a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Oh, relax. I was just playing. You're so uptight, Tamara. You need to loosen up." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. I just turned and walked toward the kitchen, my hands trembling, my ponytail still throbbing where he'd grabbed it. And that's when I made a decision that would change everything. I walked straight to Dennis Crawford's office. He was sitting behind his desk, scrolling through his phone, probably looking at the sales numbers or texting his girlfriend. I didn't knock. I just opened the door. "Dennis?" I said, my voice harder than I intended. Mr. Patterson just grabbed my ponytail. He yanked me backward. Hard. "I want him removed from the restaurant." Dennis looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to something else, something that looked a lot like annoyance. "He did what?" "Grabbed my ponytail, pulled me. It hurt. I want him gone." Dennis sighed. That sigh. I'd heard it before. Every server who'd ever complained about Gerald Patterson had heard that sigh. "Tamara, come on. He's been coming here for 20 years. He probably didn't mean anything by it. He grabbed me. Dennis, that's assault. Dennis held up his hands like he was calming down a child throwing a tantrum. Okay. Okay. Let's not throw around words like assault. He was probably just playing. You know how he is. He's old school. Just playing. There it was. The phrase that would haunt him in court 18 months later. The phrase his lawyer would try desperately to explain away. The phrase that would be played for the jury from my phone's recording app, which had been running in my apron pocket since the moment I'd seen Gerald Patterson's name on the reservation list. You see, I'd learned something 3 months before that night. I'd learned that my state was a one-party consent state for recordings. That meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of without telling the other person. I'd started carrying my phone with the voice memo app ready to go whenever I worked. I didn't know exactly when I'd need it. I just knew that someday I would. And that night, standing in Dennis Crawford's office, I was recording every word. So when Dennis said what he said next, I had it all on tape. Listen, Tamara, Mr. P is a valuable customer. He's been coming here since before you were born. He tips well. He brings friends. He's never actually hurt anyone. If you can't handle a little teasing, maybe this isn't the right environment for you. I stared at him. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and final. Are you saying you won't do anything? I'm saying I think you're overreacting. Go back to your section. Finish your shift. And for God's sake, don't make a scene. He wouldn't even make eye contact with me anymore. Just went back to scrolling on his phone like I'd already disappeared. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the recording capture the silence. Then I turned and walked out. But I didn't go back to my section. I went to the break room. I sat down, and I started to cry. Not because I was sad, because I was furious. Because I was finally, completely, absolutely done. For 5 years I had smiled. For 5 years I had dodged. For 5 years I had told myself that this was just how things were, that I couldn't change it, that I just had to survive it. But something cracked inside me that night. Something broke open and released a flood of rage I didn't even know I'd been holding back. I pulled out my phone. I stopped the recording. I saved it. I labeled it October 17th. Dennis dismissal. And then I opened a new note and started writing. Every incident I could remember. Every time a customer had touched me inappropriately. Every time I'd reported it to Dennis or any other manager. Every time I'd been told to smile through it, ignore it, deal with it. By the time I was done, I had 2 pages of notes, 2 pages of documentation that would eventually become exhibit after exhibit in a federal lawsuit. But that night, all I knew was that I had finally started fighting back, and what I discovered next would shock even me. I finished my shift that night. I had to. I needed the money, and I wasn't about to give Dennis the satisfaction of watching me quit. But something was different now. I moved through the restaurant like I was underwater, watching everything with new eyes, observing, cataloging. When Gerald Patterson tried to grab my hand as I refilled his water glass, I stepped back and said clearly and loudly, "Please don't touch me." He laughed, but I noticed the couple at the next table exchange a look. Witnesses. When I delivered his check, he asked if I wanted to come by his place after my shift. I said no thank you in a voice loud enough for 3 other tables to hear. He frowned. Good. Let him frown. Let him realize that I wasn't playing his game anymore. I clocked out at 11:15. Before I left, I made copies of the schedule showing I'd been assigned to booth 7 against my previous requests. I took photos of the complaint log at the hostess station, the one where servers were supposed to report customer incidents. My name was in there 4 times, each entry marked, resolved with no further action. I photographed all of it. And then I drove home, sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building, and called my older sister. Monica is a paralegal, has been for 15 years. She works for a law firm that handles employment discrimination cases. I'd never told her the full extent of what I dealt with at work. I guess I was embarrassed. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit that I'd let it go on for so long. But that night, I told her everything. Every touch, every comment, every dismissal from management, every time I'd been made to feel like I was the problem. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then Monica said something that would set everything in motion. Tamara, you need to document everything from now on. Dates, times, witnesses, recordings if your state allows it. Don't quit. Don't blow up. Just document. And when you have enough, we'll bury them. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up researching. Sexual harassment in the workplace. Hostile work environment. EEOC complaints. I learned about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. I learned about employer liability for customer harassment. I learned that restaurants could absolutely be held responsible for failing to protect their employees from known harassers. And I learned that everything Dennis Crawford had said to me that night, every dismissive word, every excuse, every just playing was exactly the kind of evidence that wins lawsuits. The next 3 months were the longest of my life. I went to work every shift. I smiled. I served. But underneath that smile, I was building a case. My phone recorded every shift. I documented every incident in a private journal. I noted down witnesses. I saved every text message Dennis sent me about customer complaints. When he texted me to remind me to be nicer to Mr. P because he'd complained about my attitude, I screenshotted it. When he sent a group text to the servers saying we needed to be more tolerant of our regulars' quirks, I saved that too. The evidence piled up like snow in a blizzard, and Gerald Patterson kept coming. Every Friday. Same booth. Same behavior. The difference now was that I had stopped dodging. I had stopped avoiding. I walked right up to that table and let him show who he really was, with my phone recording in my pocket every single time. But the recordings captured something I never expected. Something that would change everything. November came, then December. The holidays were brutal. The restaurant was packed every night, and the customers were drunker and grabbier than usual. Gerald Patterson brought friends to his Friday dinners now, other men his age who thought that wealth and whiteness made them untouchable. They competed with each other to see who could make me the most uncomfortable. One night, Gerald grabbed my wrist and tried to pull me onto his lap. I have that recording. Another night, his friend Frank ran his hand down my back as I walked past. I have that recording too. I reported each incident to Dennis. Each time, he sighed. Each time, he told me I was being too sensitive. Each time, I documented his response. By January, I had 19 recordings. By February, I had 28. By March, when Gerald Patterson grabbed my ponytail for the second time and yanked so hard that I dropped a tray of drinks, I had 34. That night, the second ponytail grab was different. This time, there were witnesses who couldn't look away. This time, the tray I dropped shattered 3 glasses and splashed bourbon all over a family celebrating their daughter's birthday. This time, the little girl at that table started crying. This time, everyone in that section saw exactly what Gerald Patterson did. And this time, when I went to Dennis's office, I didn't go alone. I brought Maria, another server who'd witnessed everything, and I brought my phone, recording openly now because I no longer cared if he knew. I told Dennis I wanted Gerald Patterson permanently banned from the restaurant. I told him I wanted a formal incident report filed. I told him that if he dismissed me again, I would be filing a complaint with the EEOC on Monday morning. Dennis's face went through several colors. Red for anger, white for fear. and finally a kind of sickly gray that I recognized as the color of a man realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. "I'll talk to him," Dennis said finally. "I'll ask him to be more respectful." Ask him to be more respectful. After he assaulted me in front of an entire restaurant. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out. And on Monday morning, exactly as I'd promised, I filed my complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC investigation took 4 months. During that time, I kept working. I had to. The bills didn't stop coming just because I'd blown the whistle. But things changed at the restaurant. Gerald Patterson stopped coming. Not because Dennis banned him, but because someone had finally told him about the investigation. Dennis stopped scheduling me for the best sections. He put me on Monday lunches and Tuesday closes, the dead shifts where tips were minimal. He stopped approving my time off requests. He started writing me up for tiny infractions that he'd ignored for years. He was retaliating, and I was documenting every single bit of it. The EEOC investigator was a woman named Patricia Okonkwo. She was thorough. She was patient. And when I played her my 37 recordings by the time she asked, I watched her face change. She didn't say much, just nodded, took notes, and asked for copies of everything. When she left, she shook my hand and said something I'll never forget. "You did everything right, Ms. Williams. Most people don't know to document. You knew. And that's going to make all the difference." She was right. In August, the EEOC issued its determination. They found reasonable cause to believe that Harbor Lights Grill had violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act by subjecting me to a hostile work environment and failing to take appropriate action to address customer harassment. They also found that Dennis Crawford's actions after my EEOC complaint constituted unlawful retaliation. The restaurant was given the option to settle or face a federal lawsuit. They chose to fight. Big mistake. The lawsuit was filed in September. By October, I had a lawyer, a woman named Catherine Joe, who had been doing employment discrimination cases for 20 years and had never lost one. She took my case on contingency, which meant I didn't pay her unless we won. And Catherine was very, very confident that we would win. The discovery process was brutal for the defense. They had to turn over every employee complaint filed in the past 10 years. There were dozens. They had to turn over every communication between managers about customer behavior. There were hundreds. They had to explain why a known harasser had been allowed to frequent the establishment for over 2 decades, with no consequences. They couldn't. And then, there was the trial. It lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 full days. My recordings were played for the jury. Dennis Crawford sat at the defense table looking like a man watching his career die in slow motion. Gerald Patterson wasn't a defendant in the civil case, but he was subpoenaed as a witness. Watching him squirm on the stand as Catherine Joe questioned him about his behavior was the most satisfying moment of my life up to that point. He tried to deny everything, but the recordings don't lie. His voice, clear as day, saying "just playing" after grabbing my hair. His voice, laughing as his friend touched me. His voice, asking me to come to his place like it was the most natural thing in the world. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Harbor Lights Grill liable on all counts. They awarded me $217,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress, lost wages, and hostile work environment. And then they awarded me $220,000 in punitive damages because they found the restaurant's conduct to be willful and malicious. $437,000 total. But that's not the end of the story. Not even close. While the civil case was ongoing, something else had been happening. The recordings I'd made didn't just show harassment. They showed something else. Something that Gerald Patterson never expected would come back to haunt him. On one of those recordings from a night in December, Gerald Patterson could be heard bragging to his friends about a business deal. A deal involving what he called creative accounting to avoid paying taxes on a property sale. He went into detail, specific detail, names, numbers, methods. He apparently thought that because we were in a public restaurant and I was just the help, nobody was listening. Nobody important anyway. I gave that recording to the EEOC investigator almost as an afterthought. She passed it along to someone else, and that someone else passed it along to the IRS. 6 months after I won my civil lawsuit, Gerald Patterson was indicted on 4 counts of tax fraud. He was 64 years old when he went to trial. He was 65 when he was convicted, and he was 65 and 3 months old when he was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison. The man who grabbed my ponytail and laughed about it. The man who thought that his money and his connections made him untouchable. Spent over a year of his life in a federal correctional facility because he couldn't keep his hands to himself and his mouth shut. Karma doesn't always arrive on time, but when it arrives, it brings receipts. As for Dennis Crawford, he was fired the day after the verdict. The restaurant's insurance company demanded it as a condition of continuing coverage. Last I heard, he was managing a fast food franchise somewhere in the suburbs. His wife left him during the trial. Apparently, watching your husband defend a sexual harasser on national television isn't great for a marriage. Harbor Lights Grill stayed open for another 8 months after the verdict. Then the landlord declined to renew their lease. Too much bad publicity. Too many empty tables. The location is a sushi restaurant now. I went there once. The fish was mediocre, but the satisfaction of sitting where booth 7 used to be was worth every bite. And me? I used part of my settlement to go back to school. I finished my bachelor's degree in hospitality management. Then I got my master's in human resources. Now I work as a compliance consultant for restaurant groups across the country. I help them develop harassment policies that actually work. I train managers on how to respond when employees report customer misconduct. I make sure that no server ever has to hear the words he was just playing from the person who's supposed to protect them. Last month, I got an email from a young woman named Jessica. She was 23, working at a seafood restaurant in Florida. A customer had been harassing her for months. Her manager kept telling her she was overreacting. She'd started recording. She wanted to know what to do next. I called her that same night. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, walking her through everything I wish someone had told me. Document everything. Save every message. Note down every witness. Don't quit. Don't blow up. Just build your case. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to fight. She filed her EEOC complaint last week. I'm helping her find a lawyer. Her story is just beginning, but I have a feeling it's going to end the same way mine did. With accountability. With consequences. With justice. If you're watching this and you've experienced something similar, I want you to know that you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. What happened to you was wrong. And there are people who will fight for you. There are laws that protect you. There are resources available to you. You just have to be brave enough to use them. I know it's scary. I know it feels impossible. I know that the person harassing you seems powerful and protected and untouchable. But I promise you they're not. I promise you that with documentation, with patience, with the right support, you can hold them accountable. I promise you that the satisfaction of watching them face consequences is worth every difficult day of the fight. Gerald Patterson thought he could grab my ponytail and laugh about it. He thought my manager would protect him. He thought he was just playing. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. And whoever is making you feel small and scared and powerless right now, they're wrong too. You have more power than you know. You just have to decide to use it. So if you're still watching, if this story spoke to you, do something for me. Leave a comment telling me your story. Or if you're not ready to share publicly, just type "I hear you." Let me know you're out there. Let me know you're listening. And then share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because there are millions of servers and bartenders and retail workers and office employees out there who are smiling through the same pain I smiled through, who are being told the same lies I was told, who feel just as alone as I felt. They need to know that they're not alone. They need to know that there's another way. They need to know that just playing can cost $437,000 and 14 months of freedom. And they need to know that sometimes the quiet girl with the ponytail and the recording app in her pocket is the most dangerous person in the room. My name is Tamara Williams. For 5 years I endured. For 3 months I documented. For 18 months I fought. And now, for the rest of my life, I'll be helping others do the same. But before I go, let me tell you about something that happened just last week. Something that reminded me why I do what I do now. I was conducting a training session at a restaurant group's corporate headquarters. 23 managers in the room, most of them men in their 40s and 50s who looked at me like I was there to ruin their fun. I could see the skepticism on their faces. Another harassment training. Another lecture from some corporate type who doesn't understand how the real world works. I started the session by playing a recording. Not one of mine. One that was submitted by an anonymous server at one of their locations. On it, you could hear a manager telling a crying waitress that she needed to toughen up because the customer who grabbed her was a big spender. The room went silent. Several faces went pale. One manager in the back actually put his head in his hands. When the recording ended, I let the silence stretch for a full 30 seconds. Then I said, "That manager is no longer employed by your company. Neither is the regional supervisor who ignored the server's original complaint. The server received a 6-figure settlement, and that recording has been submitted to the EEOC as evidence in an ongoing pattern and practice investigation." I paused. Let that sink in. Then I smiled. Now, who has questions about your company's harassment reporting procedures? The training lasted 4 hours. By the end, every single manager in that room had signed up for the Advanced Compliance Certification. Several of them came up to me afterward, thanking me, telling me they'd had no idea how serious this was, promising to do better. One of them, a woman about my age who managed a location in the suburbs, pulled me aside. She had tears in her eyes. "I was a server for 10 years, she said quietly. "The things that happened to me, I just thought it was normal. I thought I had to accept it." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for doing this." I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that things are actually changing. Hope that the next generation of servers won't have to develop the same survival skills I did. But I also know that hope isn't enough. Change doesn't happen because we wish for it. It happens because people like you and me demand it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for believing that things can change. Because they can. Like this video if it meant something to you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And remember, the person who told you to just deal with it was wrong. The person who said you were overreacting was wrong. The person who made you feel small and powerless was wrong. You have more power than they ever wanted you to know. And one day, if you choose to use it, they're going to find out just how wrong they were. This is Amara's Stories, where just smile meets justice, where silence becomes evidence, where documentation defeats enablement. Always. I'll see you in the next one soon.